Alright, from book 10, be reading off of phone. It was the year 2010. Oh, I also wanted to talk about the cedar oil. This one is the one with buckthorn. It's sweet. It's pretty delicious. I like to hold it in my mouth. And I had chapped lips, I put a little bit on there. I had some like soreness on my body, put it there. It's pretty incredible. And in case you're wondering, I will link below where I got it from. It was the year 2010 according to the Gregorian calendar. On the planet Earth. The first humans were awakening from a 10,000-year sleep. What lay ahead of them was to see what happened to the earth while they slept, to understand the reasons for it, to engrave a record of what had happened into their memory as an antivirus, so that nothing like this would ever happen again. They engraved the many car accidents and wars. They engraved the stench in the air, the cities, and the extensive pollution of the water, and the technocratic brain fog from reading off of a cell phone. They engraved the numerous illnesses that they had befallen humans' physical bodies while humanity was in the sleep state. They engraved. For the moment, they were unable to formulate the causes, but they will be able to. Of course they'll be able to. They'll return to the earth, its primordial nature. A small child is walking through a glade in the heart of the vibrant Siberian taiga, smiling. Nothing frightens him. No one attacks him. On the contrary, the beasts are ready to rush to his aid at the first sign of trouble. The small person walks like a royal successor walking through his kingdom. He finds it interesting to observe the lives of the bugs, the squirrels, and the birds, to study flower blossoms and see how the blades of grass and the berries taste. He'll get a bit older, and then he'll perfect his beautiful world. And where is your child at this moment? What kind of air is he breathing? What kind of water is he drinking? How will he occupy himself when he grows up? But first things first. The beginning. I decided to start this book by reminding the reader of the events that took place in Siberia more than 15 years ago, so as to make the book easier to grasp for people who haven't read the earlier books in the Ringing Cedars of Russia series. I'll try to introduce some additional information about my first meeting with the unusual Siberian hermit, Anastasia. Anastasia lives in the heart of the Siberian taiga, in the same spot where her parents and her ancestors once lived. The distance from the spot where she lived to the nearest god-forsaken Siberian village is about 25 to 27 kilometers. There are no roads and not even any paths. You'd have a very difficult time managing a trip like that without a guide. The actual glade where she lives doesn't differ from all the other taiga glades, except in that it looks somewhat cared for, and in the number of flowers. There are no structures in Anastasia's glades, no fire pits, but it's precisely this spot that Anastasia considers her family space. The first time I met Anastasia in 1994, she was 26 years old. The Siberian woman Anastasia is a very beautiful woman, even extraordinarily beautiful. The words extraordinarily beautiful are not an exaggeration. Imagine a young woman a bit more than 170 centimeters tall, with a good figure, not waif-like contemporary models, but genuinely well-built and little, as if she were a gymnast. She has regular facial features, gray-blue eyes, and the hair color of golden wheat spikes that cascade to her waist. Perhaps you could see a woman anywhere who looks like her on the outside, but I don't think you'd ever come across the other. Special qualities deep inside her that make the taiga-dwelling Anastasia extraordinarily beautiful. Everything about her external experience speaks of ideal health. It comes through in the fluidity and lightness of her gestures, and the springing way she walks as if she were flying. You get the impression that her body contains within it some kind of otherworldly energy, whose abundance warms in the surrounding space with invisible rays. Your body warms up slightly when Anastasia looks at you, and by squinting at you with some kind of special gaze, she can heat up your body to such an extent at a distance that your whole body begins to sweat, especially around the feet. Toxins leave the body, and afterwards you feel significantly better. In general, I summarize that Anastasia's knowledge of the properties of the taiga plants and some kind of inter-energy enable her to cure a person of absolutely any illness. At least she cured my ulcer with her gaze in the course of a few minutes. However, she categorically refused to do any subsequent healing. Illness is a serious conversation between God and man, says Anastasia. Through this pain, which is both yours and his at the same time, he's letting you know that you're living in some unacceptable way. Change the way you live and the pain will pass. The illness will recede. Anastasia has one extraordinary ability. When she's telling a story about something, pictures of the event she's narrating arise in the listener's consciousness, or in actual space, and the images she shows are much more picture-perfect than any modern television picture. They're three-dimensional, complete with the smells and sounds of the time she's describing. It's quite possible that at one time many people possessed these capabilities. If you bear in mind that in our technocratic time, man hasn't invented anything that wouldn't have existed in nature, then it's possible that something perfectly analogous to our modern television and telephone also exist in human civilization, in early human civilization. Anastasia has shown me pictures from the lives of people of a variety of periods, starting from the very creation of the world. Pretty much all the events she shows are connected with her ancestors, or our ancestors. If you were to try to characterize Anastasia's capabilities in one phrase, here's what you could say. The taiga dweller Anastasia preserves the experiences and emotions of the members of her extended family, starting with the creation of the very first human. In her genetic memory, she is able to, and in her Anastasia preserves the experiences and emotions of the members of her extended family, starting with the creation of the very first human in her genetic memory, and she is able to call them up at will. She can also model pictures from the lives of people in the future. Anastasia's life in the Siberian taiga differs significantly from the lives of people in modern cities. So that you'll be able to understand the conditions in which she lives out her life, I have to say a few words about what the Siberian taiga is. It's Russia's largest expanse of open land, ancient and snow-covered. In European Russia, it extends for 800 kilometers, while in western and eastern Siberia, it stretches out for 2,150 kilometers. As you can see, this is an impressive landmass. Today, the taiga is considered the Earth's lungs, and rightly so. It produces the majority of free oxygen. And you have to bear in mind that the taiga zones began forming even before the onset of the glaciers. So by studying life in today's taiga zone, we can learn about life on the planet Earth before the Ice Age. Remains of a well-preserved baby mammoth, now kept in the Zoological Museum in St. Petersburg, were discovered in the permafrost. It's hard for us to get a good idea of the animal world in taiga zones before the Ice Age, In today's taiga, lynxes, wolverines, chipmunks, sables, squirrels, bears, foxes, and wolves are numerous and widespread. The ungulates you'll encounter include noble and northern deer, elk, roe deer. There are numerous rodents, shrews, and mice. Among birds, wood grouse, hazel grouse, nutcrackers, and crossbills are ubiquitous. During the winter, the great majority of animals settle into anabiosis or hibernation. This state of living organisms has been little studied by scientists and is generally greater and greater interest among those who study outer space. As far as the plant world is concerned, various types of bushes grow in the taiga: juniper, honeysuckle, currant, and willow, and others. You'll find bilberries, cowberries, cranberries, and cloudberries, all with marvelous vitamin content. Among grasses suitable for consumption, sourgrass, wintergrass, and ferns predominate. You'll find majestic trees reaching 40 meters in height, spruce, fir, larch, pine, and a tree with unique qualities, the cedar, which scientists sometimes call cedar pine. I'll say right off, in my opinion, they really shouldn't call it that at all. But what can you do? Let science focus on the pine they mistakenly call a cedar. I'm going to talk about the incomparable Siberian cedar. Why is it incomparable? Because the cedar gives unique fruits, cedar nuts, and deserves its own separate name. The quality of the fruit of the Siberian cedar, these cedar nuts, greatly surpasses that of the nuts of cedars in the climate zones on the planet. Way back in 1792, the academic palace wrote about this in a letter to the Russian Empress Catherine the Great. Cedar wood possesses special phytonutritional properties, even once it's been cut. So a moth will never take up residence in a closet made of cedar. An Old Testament's King Solomon, who also seems to have known of cedar's mysterious properties, built a temple out of it, having given away several entire cities of his kingdom in exchange for certain specially chosen cedars. But the priests were unable to perform services in the temple because a cloud formed inside of it. 3 Kings 8:11. After having pored over a multitude of sources that talk about the Siberian cedar, I'm inclined to suggest, and not without bias, that the cedar is representative of the pre-Ice Age plant world. And it may be an envoy to us from a different, more developed civilization in the biological sense. How was it able to survive the planetary catastrophe and come to life anew in our world? Cedar seeds can survive frost and are able to hold out for extended period of time so that they can come up during more favorable climatic conditions and adapt to a new environment. This adaptation continues up to the present day. What is so unique about the fruit of the cedar? Why is it that today we can state with certainty that they are the most ecologically pure and healing food product of our time? The cedar nut kernel contains the entire necessity complex of vitamins. Scientists from the University in Tomsk, who have studied the properties of cedar oil, added it to the diet of people who have served as responders to the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and who were suffering from radiation poisoning. The results of the experiment showed that these test subjects' immunity began to increase. There are no contradictions for the use of cedar oil. Even pregnant women and nursing mothers can use it. There's one other mysterious fact about the cedar nut kernel. During periods when cedars do not bear fruit, the females of certain fur-bearing animals don't allow males to come near them and don't conceive. It's still unclear how the cedar let the animals know that they won't bear fruit in a given year. After all, the animals mate in the spring, but cedar fruits ripen only in late fall, and it's very difficult to tell just by looking at the cedar tree that it's not going to bear fruit. There are a great many other plants in the taiga for the entire taiga animal world to feed on. Similar taiga-dwelling animals in Russia's central zone get along entirely without cedar nuts. So why do females who have fed on cedar nuts consider it impossible to conceive and bear young without this food? It's been noted that the fur of taiga-dwelling animals, particularly those from regions where cedars grow, is of much higher quality than the fur of all other animals. No matter how scientists and specialists fine-tune the diet of the animals they're raising on fur farms, they can't manage to achieve fur of anywhere near the same quality. The fur of the Siberian sable from the regions where cedars grow has always been the highest quality fur in the world. It's well known that the condition of fur-bearing animals' fur reflects the condition of their organism as a whole. So if their condition improves when they consume cedar nut kernels, then the same should be true for humans, especially pregnant women. Our women might not be getting enough high-quality food products to enable them to bear healthy fetuses, and this situation can't help but degrade society. The fruit of the Siberian cedar disproves scientists' opinion that agriculture is the great achievement of humans, evidence of their development. I think that agriculture came into being because human civilization lost its knowledge of nature and because people's way of life changed. As a result, man began sweating in the fields to get his daily bread. You can draw your own conclusions. Let's imagine that there are 2 fruit-bearing cedar trees growing on a parcel of land where a family of 3 peoples lives. You can be absolutely certain that the family that owns the parcel of land where the 2 cedars grow will never go hungry, even in the years with the worst harvests. And it isn't just that they won't go hungry, won't live from hand to mouth. They will feed on the best, most refined food there is. 1 cedar alone is capable of producing in 1 year up to a ton of cedar nuts that can be used as food once they're shelled. But that's not all by any means. You can extract cedar milk from the kernel of the cedar nut, which is not only suitable for human consumption, but which you can also successfully use to feed infants. You can get world-class cedar oil from the kernels, which you can add to salads and other dishes and also use medicinally. After you express the oil from the cedar nut kernels, you're left with an oil cake, which you can use to make excellent baked goods, breads, cookies, pastries, or crepes. The cedar also gives us a sap that's recognized by official and folk medicine alike as a medicinal and prophylactic substance. A Siberian cedar doesn't require any care by humans. You don't need to fertilize or till around it. You don't even need to plant it. The seeds are planted in the earth by a little bird called the Eurasian nutcracker. It starts to become clear why it is that our ancient ancestors knew nothing about agriculture. It's just because they knew much, much more. Maybe someone will say, well, the cedar bears fruit only once in 2 years, and if the barren year comes along in the same year as a bad harvest, then how can the cedar remedy this situation? I'll tell you. It's true that cedars bear fruit once every 2 years, sometimes even less frequently, but its unique nuts can last from 9 to 11 years if you don't remove them from the cone. Of course, nothing is quite this simple today in our real life. The cedar has a hard time taking roots near cities. It can't tolerate ecologically polluted zones, but there are also encouraging outcomes. Many sources indicate that the cedar responds to human emotions, that it can take an energy from humans and having increased it, give it back. I had the chance to convince myself of this personally. 7 years ago, 25 taiga cedar seedlings were sent to me, together with the residents of the 5-story building where my apartment is located. I planted these seedlings in the little wooded area bordering the building. I planted 3 of them along the edge of the plot of my country house. Before long, somebody dug up the cedars we'd planted in the wooded area. I wasn't too terribly upset by this. I figured that if somebody dug them up, that meant people knew about their properties and would most likely plant them somewhere else and take good care of them. But one seedling still remained there. It had been planted near the brick wall of the garages located in the front building. The soil there was so far from fertile. For the most part, it was construction refuse covered up over with a thin layer of fertile dirt. Nonetheless, the cedar took root, and it's still growing today. As far as its rate of growth and how smooth its trunk is quite different from the cedars I planted at my country house, and it's about twice as tall. I got to thinking about why that would be, and I began to notice that when the people in the city came out to their balconies, they often look at the cedar, and sometimes they remark, "What a beautiful tree we have." And I too, when I walk or drive by, happily admire it. In this way, the cedar growing by the garages receives human attention and strives to be worthy of it. Now, especially since the Ringing Cedars of Russia series of books started coming out, there are many companies that put out cedar products, including cedar oil. I also asked my daughter and her husband to set up a cedar oil production. I told them about the ancient technique I'd learned from Anastasia. Polina's husband, Sergei, made every possible effort to work in accord with both ancient techniques and today's requirements for producing food products. We arranged for the production to take place at a medications factory under the control of experienced specialists. The expression was carried out using the cold pressing method, which is supposed to preserve the greatest amount of the oil's beneficial substances, and using wooden blocks. It was necessary to do this because the cedar nut kernel and oil contain the entire periodic table, and certain elements can oxidize if they come into contact with metal. In addition, only glass containers were used during bottling. The oil we ended up with may also have been of better quality than if we'd produced it using other methods such as a hot pressing. However, it differed from the cedar oil I tried in the taiga. I got the impression that it contained less life force than the taiga cedar oil. I won't go into detail about our extensive attempts to find the reason for the differences. I'll start by saying that we saw a change in quality as soon as we moved the whole production process, from nut storage up to the processing of the oil and its packaging, to a village out into the taiga 120 kilometers outside the city. It turned out that you can't just produce a high-quality oil in an urban setting, even at a medications factory. At every stage of the production, the kernel and oil come into contact with the air, and big city air is very different from air in the taiga, which is full of phytoncides. 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 As a result of moving production, the production of all this small company, which was perhaps not very technically well equipped according to today's standards, were of higher quality than those produced by all other companies, not only in our country, I think, but in this world. I'm happy to have played even a small role in the appearance of this unique product, cedar oil. I think that this taiga company is really the one that produces actual cedar oil, because others produce the oil of the cedar pine. A great many products in the world are marketed as ecologically pure, but I immediately asked myself where these products are from. Where were they grown? Can you really call any product ecologically pure at all if its raw materials are grown and produced in the areas surrounded by highways or big and small cities? I don't think any product produced in areas like this can be ecologically pure, even if no toxic chemicals, pesticides, or fertilizers are used to grow it. The cedar grows deep in the Siberian taiga, hundreds and thousands of kilometers from large cities. There are no highways there, and you can only ship this unique product out by river. Of course, our civilization's filth can also end up there, but everything in this world is relative. And compared to giant cities, the air and water in the taiga really are immeasurably cleaner, and no one is pouring any poisons into the ground. And so, I think that there is no more pure, beneficial, or healing product in the world than the cedar nut kernel and the products made from it. In telling about the Siberian taiga, I've given a special attention to the cedar. But in the taiga region, there are also many other food products that are of much higher quality than those we're already aware of. For example, cranberries, raspberries, cloudberries, currants, and mushrooms. And to answer the question, what does Anastasia eat on the taiga? I can tell you that she eats world-class, ecologically pure food of a type that you can't possibly buy, not even for $1 million. But in my first book, I described how Anastasia lives out in the taiga and how astonished I was by her way of life. Now that so many years have passed since we first met, and thinking about her, I've come to the conclusion that the way people live in today's giant cities looks unnatural and absurd if you juxtapose it with Anastasia's life out in nature. At first glance, it seems extraordinary, the way the wild animals bring food to Anastasia when she gives them a certain signal. But even a hunting dog today will bring its prey to its master, and a falcon released to hunt also turns its prey over to its master. Goats and cows in a village farmyard are happy to feed their owners by giving them milk. The wild animals inhabiting the area around the glade where Anastasia lives make their territory, and within this territory they consider a person something like a pack leader. I think that over the generations they were trained by Anastasia's forebears, and then they themselves train their offspring. Anastasia actually eats very little. She never makes a fetish out of food. Many people have been asking recently about how Anastasia makes it through the severe Siberian winter when the temperature reaches 35 to 40 degrees below zero. If she doesn't have any warm clothes or heated dwelling, I'll start by saying that if the air temperature out in the open gets down to minus 30, it's always significantly warmer in the taiga, and there can be up to 10-degree difference in temperature. Anastasia has dugouts at various locations in the taiga. The main one, where I myself have had occasion to pass the night more than once, consists of a spot hollowed out in the ground, about 2.5 meters long, 2 meters wide, and also 2 meters high. The entrance to the dugout is narrow, about 60 centimeters wide, and 1.5 meters high. The entrance is covered with cedar branches. The walls of ceilings of the taiga bedroom are woven of vines with bunches of dried grasses and taiga flowers stuffed into them. The floor has been carpeted with dried hay. It is very comfortable sleeping in that kind of bedroom in the summer. No sounds penetrate it, to say nothing of all those radio and electrical emissions that a person living in a multi-story building is subjected to. In late fall, Anastasia fills the entire area of her bedroom with dry hay and enters into extended sleep similar to the state scientists call anabiosis. Anabiosis in modern science explains it is a state in which all of the living beings' vital processes, including metabolism, slow down to such an extent that there are no visible signs of life. Scientists have been focused on this unique biological phenomenon as they develop plans for extended space travel. What primarily attracts them is the fact that creatures in an anabiotic or hibernation state use much less oxygen and do not need food. It's been proven that their resistance to negative environmental factors increases. So, for example, It's been shown that infectious diseases don't develop in such animals when they're artificially infected, and that many poisons which would be fatal for their organism under normal circumstances are entirely harmless to them when they're hibernating or in an antibiotic state. It has even been proven that if you subject such animals to a fatal dose of ionizing radiation, they will still survive since their metabolism has greatly decelerated, and that once they awaken, their vital functions resume entirely normal. But here's what's interesting. If a person who is thinking being falls into deep sleep in the winter, then what happens to his soul during this period? I haven't come across any hypothesis at all about this in scientific writings, but it is an extremely interesting question. One day, I too had occasion to partially experience the unusual state of anabiosis for myself. This happened when I was in the taiga in late fall, where Anastasia lives. The days at the time of the year are very short. When it began to get dark, Anastasia suggested I take a rest. I immediately agreed. The accumulated fatigue of city life and my taxing journey through the taiga were already driving me towards sleep. This time, the dugout was full of more hay than usual, since I knew you don't get cold sleeping in hay even when it's below zero. I stripped down to my underwear and lay down, putting my jacket beneath my head. "It's already time for you to be waking up, Vladimir," Anastasia said, waking me. I felt her massaging my right hand and looked toward the entrance of the dugout. Its opening was barely visible. That meant the sun hadn't come up. Why do I need to wake up? The dawn is just breaking. It's the third day since you went to sleep that's breaking, Vladimir. Should you not wake up, your sleep might continue for several months and even years. Your soul, since it won't need to worry about keeping your body safe, will want to have rest and wander around other worlds in the universe. No one would be able to bring back until it decides on its own that it wants to come back. So that means it wasn't with me while I was sleeping? It was with you, Vladimir, right alongside you. It was waiting for your sleep to become more even and deeper, and then it would have been able to take its leave. But I decided to wake you. But why doesn't your soul leave when you fall into a deep sleep? My soul leaves, too, but it always comes back right on time. After all, I don't torment it. What do you mean? You mean I torment my soul? Vladimir, every person who falls prey to harmful habits and thought patterns and who consumes harmful foods brings torment first and foremost to his soul. What importance does food have for the soul? What does it also consume the food a person eats? The soul doesn't feed on material food, Vladimir, but it is able to see, hear, and actualize itself only through your body. If the body is unhealthy, if a person is drunk and his body is helpless, then the soul, as if it were bound, has no way of manifesting and actualizing itself. It can only feel, only weep over the helpless body that has been destroyed by the harmful drink. It can only attempt to warm damaged organs of the body, and it will expend a colossal amount of energy as it does so. When the soul's energy is exhausted, it becomes powerless and leaves the human body. The body dies. Yes, Anastasia, what you've said about the soul is interesting, and it seems accurate, because there's a folk saying, when a person dies, they say that he gave up his soul to God. When we get in our interpretation is the soul ran out of strength. I wonder, does my soul still have strength left? Since it came back, that means your soul still has strength, Vladimir, but please try not to torment it. I will try, but wait, doesn't a person's soul get a rest when he's sleeping? The soul is energy, Vladimir, a living energetic complex. Energy doesn't need rest. But do what you think, Anastasia. But what do you think, Anastasia? Where does the soul go off during sleep? It can go off to other dimensions, soaring around among the planets of the universe, and if the person wishes it to do so, it can gather information he needs. For example, if the person wants to learn something about the past or future, he can ask his soul as he falls asleep to visit the time and place that interests him, and the soul will fulfill his wish. But if the person sleeps an ordinary sleep, that isn't sufficiently peaceful, and if the body environment is not ideal, then the soul can't go off anywhere. It has to guard his body. From whom? From all manner of hostile influences. You sleep in your apartment, Vladimir, and its walls are filled to bursting with electrical wires, and the wires give off radiation that adversely affects people. Sound of the artificial world force their way through the glass. The air in the apartment is not entirely healthy to breathe. Your soul cannot leave you alone. It has to be able to wake you in case of critical situation. I get it, Anastasia. This dugout I slept in is actually a great deal more comfortable than the most elegant bedrooms in today's hotels and apartments. It's like some kind of hyperbaric chamber. The air here is ideal, and there are no harmful rays and noise, and the temperature is stable, and so I sleep much better in it than I do in my apartment. I understand that, and I've experienced it for myself, but I don't get why it is, when you fall asleep for a long time, that it doesn't bother your soul that your body is resting in a dugout where the entrance isn't even shut up. And if there's some danger, say are some intruders, they won't be anybody to wake it up. Vladimir, anytime anyone makes the slightest attempt to approach the glade we're in, no matter what their intentions, the entire space within a radius of 3 kilometers is put on its guard. The animals, birds, plants begin sounding the alarm. Those who are approaching will be gripped by terror, and if they succeed in overcoming it and aren't thrown off course, then the space, by means of the animals, will wake the body and call the soul back. What about in the winter, when everything's asleep? Not everything is asleep in the winter. Besides, in the winter, it is easier for those who are awake to keep watch over what goes on. I don't understand everything Anastasia said about the soul during the winter sleep period, but I have been on occasion to see for myself the way the wild animals and birds bring Anastasia troubling or happy news. Now that I'm familiar with the way Anastasia thinks of sleep, I can draw the following conclusion. Modern man and mankind as a whole don't have any opportunity to get enough good sleep. Besides the fact that modern bedrooms can't measure up the natural one, we have to add one more factor that's also of some importance. Modern man is continually caught up in a whirlwind of everyday worldly concerns, and he often keeps on thinking about them as he falls asleep. And if that's the case, then the question arises of how man is using the energy of his soul which is capable of learning about other worlds when a person is sleeping and bringing him information about them when he wakes. Perhaps we need to construct our bedrooms so that no random sounds will penetrate it, and so that there are no wires and telephones in it. It is possible for us to achieve this. It's more complicated to imagine than necessary air quality. And so, Anastasia the Hermit of the Siberian Taiga has become the heroine of the Ringing Cedars of Russia. Series of books. She has borne me a son and a daughter. She now lives in the taiga, in my heart, and in the image of the heroine of my books. I don't think I've been able to do this amazing woman's beauty, her intelligence, and her extraordinary capabilities justice in my descriptions. Really, it's probably not even possible to do this using ordinary language. Even now, I only sometimes see Anastasia as someone who is close to me, as a loved one. More often, I see her as an unattainable and mysterious, as someone who possesses an inexplicable strength of spirit that she can use to create the future. Her characterization of our modern-day reality and her story or more precisely, the image she has created of the beautiful future of Russia and of the whole earth, has given birth to beautiful phenomena in society. Without waiting for decrees to be handed down from on high or for government financing, tens of thousands of people have independently set about turning this image created by Anastasia into an actual reality. You can understand the main idea for building our future country by reading the books in order. But if I were to try briefly, not in its entirety, present the idea that is helping these positive transformations take place, I could characterize it using the following words. Anastasia thinks that every family should have its own plot of land that's no less than 1 hectare in size. The family needs to transform this plot, which the Taiga hermit calls a family homestead, into a heavenly living oasis that can provide for all of man's material needs. The external appearance of the person's living creation and the way of the Creator himself lives on it are indicators of a person's spiritual makeup. She considers it unacceptable to bury family members in a cemetery. They must be buried only on the family homesteads. Then, the souls of relatives who have passed on won't suffer because their bodies seem to have been tossed into some deep hole in a cemetery, far away from their loved ones. People who are buried on the family homestead will, with their spirit, help and protect those living on it. Cemeteries, analogous to our modern ones, did exist back in antiquity too, but they were intended for animals that dropped dead from disease, criminals with no family, and warriors who died in a foreign land. Anastasia has told us how to set up our family homestead so that we can free ourselves from physical elements with its help. She's talked in relatively great detail about the ancient and very lovely rite of marriage that helped newlyweds, along with the power of their thought, create the design of their future family homestead, and about how at the moment of marriage, with the participation of the parents, relatives, and friends, what they had conceived and thought would materialize in the space of several minutes. I think that this rite is one of the greatest discoveries of our millennium. After all, by using it, newlyweds even today can acquire a house, a garden, and a family homestead right during their wedding. Anastasia also asserts that for newlyweds who create their family homesteads in this way, love never fades, but actually grows stronger over the years, and she explains why this happens. When a husband looks at his wife, he subconsciously associates her with his glorious homestead too, and also with his child, who must also be born on the homestead. And one can believe in this. After all, the very blessed place on earth for each person is always his small motherland. His child will always be the most beautiful and best of all children. And Anastasia also asserts that if all people, or the majority of them, begin consciously creating their own family homesteads and turning them into heavenly oases, then the whole earth will be transformed. Natural disasters and wars will not occur on earth. Man's inner spiritual world will change, and new knowledge and capabilities will open up to him. Man will be able to create beautiful worlds resembling the earthly world on other planets. She considers today's technocratic method of exploring space and other planets a dead end, harmful for the planet and the earth and people living on it. The sensible way to explore the planets is through psychoteleportation. But if people are able to do this, they first have to demonstrate their ability to develop the earth and express their spirituality in their way of life, not in words. Official critics might respond to the subject of the books and to the Taiga hermit statements in any of a number of ways, but their opinions aren't really so very important. The people, the most important critics, have already expressed their approval in tens of thousands of letters and hundreds of thousands of emails. They've expressed it not only in words, but in concrete actions too, and the hundreds of large and small settlements that have arisen and continue to arise throughout all Russia and confirmation are a confirmation of this. Now, here's where a riddle arises. One that's as yet insoluble and cryptic. If a mass movement has been set in motion solely by the statements of a taiga hermit that have been introduced in books, then what kind of power lies behind her phrases? Perhaps they're constructed in such a way that the letters combine into some kind of code. Perhaps a certain rhythm of her phrases has significance. Anastasia usually tries to adopt the speaking mannerisms of those she's talking with, to use his lexicon and way of constructing phrases, but at a certain moment she'll suddenly begin speaking in some different kind of language that's empathetic and flowing and rhythmical. She pronounces each letter of the phrases she utters very precisely, and you clearly sense an extraordinary energy behind each sound, and then you remember what she said verbatim, as if there's some recorder at work in your brain. And that's not all. Living pictures appear before the listeners, and the subconscious grasps the meaning of what's being said. By way of example, I'll give you an excerption from Anastasia's retelling of a conversation between God and the first man, from the book Co-Creation.